Hello and welcome. The goal of this podcast is to get listeners connected with others in the sports industry because they say it's all about who you know, and now you know us. All right, hello and welcome, guests, to another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast where we connect you with the movers and shakers in the sports industry. I'm your host, Connor Shank, and today we have an exceptional guest joining us. It's Dylan Steele. Thanks for joining us today, Dylan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to dive into your background at the University of Michigan as a student athlete, as a leader in NIL space, with your job now. And I'm excited to kind of showcase the viewers and listeners what life as a collegiate athlete, also, getting a sports management degree, minoring in real estate development and entrepreneurship. And did you win three national titles? Is that right?
Yes, three during my time at Michigan. Definitely an incredible experience, something I wouldn't trade for the world.
Yeah, so we'll dive into that, of course. So I assume a big Wolverines fan in here. My co-host, funny enough, Sal, he's a big Penn State fan. So I wish he was on here so you guys could have a little verbal joust, but I'm sure he's listening and watching.
Oh yeah, I went to Happy Valley last year for the football game. Was down on the field. Great experience, great atmosphere there, and a great outcome for the Wolverines, of course. So
Of course, of course. So we'll just kind of dive in here real quick. Talk to us about, being an, because you're obviously you were an athlete, so you were on the kind of the inside of the NIL and how that's been basically evolved into a new industry in the past 3.5, 4 years. So what was kind of your role at Michigan with the NIL efforts and things like that?
yeah, so I came into Michigan during COVID, so 2020. That's my freshman year. Wasn't really involved with anything within the athletic department. So my sophomore year really wanted to get involved with the school. So looked into our student athlete advisory committee, ended up joining. I got put on the subcommittee group for NCAA legislation at the time, and they ended up adding NIL about halfway through. They sent me down to Atlanta for the first ever NIL summit where I was able to pick some brains of people that have been involved in the space, a little bit more knowledge than I had. When I first got down there, I think I was like any athlete that just kind of assumed money was going to be coming into our pockets without really having to do any work, and kind of learned more about the entrepreneurial side of NIL down there. I was able to bring that back to my campus. Then I was elected to be the head of the subcommittee for my last 2 years, which was a really cool experience.
Oh wow, yeah, awesome. And then so you have kind of this new outlook and fresh, insider experience as being a student athlete. So how did that shape your approach to kind of working in the space, kind of being boots on the ground as a student athlete, and then bringing that to the table with other individuals, right, in the programs or whatnot that aren't student athletes?
Yeah, I think really it came down to a lot of education. I think a lot of people don't understand what influencer marketing really is and what the
Hmm.
benefits are. So being able to kind of bring that educational piece, obviously being involved with it for the 3 years I was at the University of Michigan, now moving into the professional world, there's not too many people that have been involved as far as that goes. So being able to really be that beacon of hope, I guess, for the NIL space for people, kind of getting rid of some of those negative connotations of it and showing the positive lights, and that it really can be beneficial to both the athlete and the business as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And then as the University of Michigan's obviously one of the bigger programs in the land. So what was that like working with such a high level, I mean, all right, professional organization, right, in college sports now. So what was that like kind of being boots on the ground there at a massive university like that?
It was something that I wouldn't change for the world. It was incredible. The resources that we had access to there really helped get the NIL program off the ground. So
Mhm.
one thing that we really wanted to do is try to limit the amount of third parties that were involved with the University of Michigan. So we have one of the best law schools in the nation. We were able to get a contract review program through them for our athletes. Just have them be able to look over things, have a third or another opinion with the law school there of those contracts that are being signed. We're seeing some horror stories coming out at the beginning of NIL with players signing away their NIL rights for their entire lives for $5,000 or something like that. So being able to really make sure that our athletes were safe in the space, so that way they felt like they could contribute to it. And once that was established, we were also able to go into the Ross Business School at Michigan, one of the best business schools in the nation, find some professors to set up office hours for personal branding as far as that goes. And one thing that I was really big on was getting some content creation in there.
Mm.
The NIL space is all about content. What can we do? So being able to really connect our athletes with those resources, figuring out their own personal brand that could help them get those bigger deals down the line.
Yeah, no doubt. And then what I guess education is obviously going to play a big role in the NIL industry is so, fast paced and evolving day by day. So what does kind of education look like on that side of things, like when you're at a university trying to educate athletes, but then also parents and businesses?
Yeah, so on the athlete side, it really comes down to what approaches are going to help build your brand the fastest and the most effective. So you start out obviously being a student athlete, which is huge for your brand, but there are so many student athletes of all those sports. So what makes you really stand out and differentiates yourself? So being more than an athlete, and the end goal for the athletes that we have is your sport career is going to be 4 to 5 years unless you're lucky enough to go professional, and that's less than 1-2%
Yep.
of collegiate athletes that we see. So how can we build a brand that transcends your athletic experience so that you can still be involved in that space, become that influencer moving forward? As far as parents go, it really comes down to showing that the university has the necessary resources to help their students or their kids succeed in all aspects of life, not just on the field. And the business side is where it gets really interesting. Well, a lot of them don't see the value in influencer marketing, and a lot of stuff you're seeing with schools with a lot of local brands getting involved. And local brands don't necessarily have the same budget you see with some of the brands in the corporate world. So when you're asking them to spend $1,000, $2,000 on things, you really need to show what those numbers are going to be, and it really comes down to engagement rates. I feel because a lot of people look at follower counts and they're not seeing the engagement that these.
Yeah, for sure. And then kind of specifically on the athlete side where, hockey is a booming industry as of late, but I feel like at the beginning it was just football and basketball, and it was just an arms race to see who could get the most money to keep the players. But how have you seen kind of smaller sports? How have you seen those sports specifically grow in the space of NIL?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's a visibility piece.
Yep.
Before we go back about 5, 10 years, the only sports that were aired were football and men's basketball. Those are
Hmm.
the sports that have those fan bases. But now you're seeing with streaming some more options to be able to see these athletes. And even like they can put their highlights on their social accounts that have huge following, which gives them some exposure. So just being able to showcase that there are more sports out there and that people do have interest in those sports, especially people that played those sports growing up, things as far as that goes, which has really been able to expand that space. And we saw football go first, then we saw both men's and women's basketball kind of go second. I see hockey kind of following in that line going third. And also, we can't count out our Olympic sports by any means, especially with the Olympics just taking place. You're seeing brands come out of there that we've never seen that are bigger than some of these star football players in an extent. So the Olympic sports are also something that's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess as we touched on the Olympics there, you have some experience in the past with Special Olympics and some events along those lines. So talk to the kind of listeners and viewers on kind of what that experience was like, maybe how you got it, some cool stories from that time.
Yeah, so I really got involved with Special Olympics when I was in high school. I played baseball growing up. It was my main sport. And due to a rotator cuff injury, wasn't able to participate in going into my freshman year. So I ended up volunteering at a unified Special Olympics event, state games at Central Michigan University. Basically, what happens there is it's a week-long competition. Every day is a different sport. So we would do track one day, volleyball the next day, and then a bocce ball is also involved in
Hmm.
that. What ended up happening is we ended up doing our track event. I got second place. We're sitting up there with the podium, and someone came up to me and talked to me like, "Hey, like we only get one weekend to do this, whereas when you're playing your sport, you get a full season." So it really became a mission of mine to figure out how can I get more experience, more visibility for these athletes. And in my hometown, created a unified basketball league that involved 4 schools. I believe it expanded to 8, but just giving them more opportunity in sport than they had before.
Very cool. And that kind of parlays into my next question with was it the Green Bay Booyah or that was a baseball kind of team league. So talk to us about kind of the branding side of that, the event management side, because a lot of the listeners and viewers are kind of some of their first jobs or event management, ticketing, things like that. And I feel like this kind of fits well into that.
Yeah, definitely. That was my first experience. First internship was going out to, they were the Green Bay Booyah and rebranded about a month before I got there to the Green Bay Rockers. So
Okay.
right when I got there, one of the first things we were doing was painting everything over, getting the colors down, getting rid of any signs that said Booyah, putting up Rocker signs. And it was really cool to see that on a smaller level. Like I recommend working in minor league baseball if possible to get started because you get hands-on experience with every aspect of it.
Yep.
But one thing that was really cool with the events is you're seeing these venues, even in the professional side, shifting into these 365-day uses. And that was part of the reason behind the switch to the Rockers was to get these concerts involved there. So we ended up having two concerts that summer, which was really cool. I never really thought I'd get to touch the concert space. But just seeing how a baseball stadium flipped over with getting the floor down, getting everything set.
Yeah.
Then also the next day, one day we had a concert and a baseball game the next day at noon. So having to get there at 4 a.m. to get that floor on really taught me a little bit more than just the sports side, but the entertainment side as a whole that we're seeing the industry kind of shift into.
Oh yeah, and we see, even NFL stadiums, right? I mean, everyone wants their stadium to be year round, even if it's not the main sport. And there's concerts, and I mean, a lot of the what like venues turn their fields into ice rinks at sometimes. So that's which I still don't fully understand how that's even possible. But I actually maybe you can little side quest here. How are we putting ice on football fields like that and things?
That's something I'd love to figure out. I've never been
Okay.
really involved in that side, but like recently, Michigan and Ohio State are going to be playing on Wrigley Field, which is pretty cool for
Yeah.
hockey. So some exciting opportunities there, and I'm sure it's cool for the fans and experience to be able to see people play in venues that you never really would expect that to
Yep.
happen.
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of reminds me, I think they're playing a baseball game at like a motor speedway, a pro baseball game in like next few years or something, which is cool to kind of change things up. But yeah, that was a little side question. It just popped in my mind. And I've always wondered how we're getting ice on fields like that. I'm sure there's much smarter people than I that'll figure that out. But as you've, worked with this baseball team, then kind of worked your way up with different experiences and being a student athlete, you've landed with Nielsen Sports now. So talk to the viewers and listeners about maybe what Nielsen is, how you kind of got to that role you're in now.
Yeah, so Nielsen Sports is really the first hockey NIL agency that focuses specifically just on hockey. As I said, a lot of these agencies have been focusing on football and basketball. So really cool to see that space kind of getting explored now. So a lot of it really comes down right now again to that education piece specifically with businesses on that local side. So really what we're seeing with our numbers and that our engagement rates are through the roof compared to what you'd expect. A good engagement rate for an influencer is usually between 5 to 10%. We're
Mm.
seeing a handful of our athletes over 20%. And I'll kind of give a shout out to the Michigan boy that we have on our team, Phil LaPointe, a good friend of mine. His engagement rate is 45%, which is
Wow.
through the roof. So even though he only has 7,000 followers with that 45% engagement, you can expect over 3,000 people on the post. And we have a metric that shows that that's equivalent to 63,000 followers. So that's
Mm.
just something that's incredible with what we have with our hockey athletes and something I'm really excited to be able to showcase in the coming years.
Yeah, very cool. And the hockey kind of specific, agency is much needed, obviously. So where do you see kind of the, I guess, hockey NIL sector going in the futures, and explain to kind of some of the viewers if there's Division I hockey, but then there's other levels and things like that. So what maybe just the call it collegiate hockey landscape at a whole.
So I think right now you're looking at the big conferences. Big Ten kind of runs that right. But you're also seeing some of these like smaller schools that don't have football programs or their football programs aren't necessarily FBS. So
Mm.
what you're seeing is like we have markets in North Dakota that don't have an FBS team, but their hockey team is the top notch there. We have athletes at the University of Denver, defending national champions at this point. The guy we just signed is actually their leading scorer from the team, last year's team. So you're seeing these different markets that are popping up, and even like Boston University, that's a huge market in Boston. That's not necessarily you have Boston College with their football program,
Mhm.
but as far as the ACC goes, not necessarily top dogs there. But Boston University hockey players are top line there. So you're able to see that sometimes in these other markets, football isn't necessarily king, and those are the markets that are going to take off.
Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously going to where, the markets aren't very proficient in big brands and big sports, if obviously is kind of new blood for maybe some of the businesses or, families and friends that have a hockey team or have a brother or someone who plays on the team to kind of, infuse some of that excitement for hockey. And as you see, NIL heading in the next 3 to 5 years, what kind of maybe changes, or if you can have a crystal ball, what do you kind of project in the next 3 to 5 years regarding NIL and the sector as a whole?
Yeah, I see a lot more group marketing deals going on where people will take, let's say we'll use hockey for an example, but you take one player from a North Dakota market, one player from a Denver market, one player from a Michigan market, and you can get these massive campaigns going that way. I think that a lot of people in the space right now are really focusing on the starting quarterbacks that have 500,000 players, but you only get one post with them when you can get smaller branded athletes, or you can get 20 of them for the same price. And at that point, odds are of those 20 videos, a couple of them are going to do a lot better when you're only getting one video. If it flops, at that point, you're kind of screwed. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that we'll see a little bit. I also think, and like I touched on it, that these athletes are going to be building brands that transcend what they were as athletes. So you'll see these people become influencers into their late 20s, early 30s, and you'll see more longevity of them instead of just popping up for one good season here.
Well, yeah, and the longevity is most important, especially when building a brand and building a personality right in the space. Is there or are there certain, books or influencers that you kind of have your clients and athletes say, hey, okay, look, this is a good example of how to build content and structure things?
I think really what I'm looking at now is retired. I think really you're seeing them, they've taken advantage of their playing career. So you can look at them and then see what they're doing outside. And one way, a good way to find athletes of this is talking to your friends that aren't necessarily interested in sports. I'll use Rob Gronkowski as an example, big name, everybody knows.
Yep.
But when he was playing, everybody in the football world knew him as one of the best tight ends. But now he kind of has that party vibe that you're seeing around that. I'm having people coming up. I'm like, yeah, this Rob Gronkowski guy is kind of cool. And it's even good for the organization as a whole because now people are kind of going with like, oh, he's with the Patriots. That's a cool team. The people are a lot more loyal to individual players than they are the team now. We're seeing
Hmm.
that trend. So even for the teams, it's good to get involved with these players and start building their brand when they're an athlete on that team. And then once they're done with their playing career responsibilities, they can still help build that individual like sports team brand as well.
Yep, I like it. And as I had a question just kind of pop up into my head, but we've seen with college football, college basketball, especially the transfer portal, NIL is big. Is that similar in hockey or in not so much with the coming and going of players?
Yeah, I think hockey's a little interesting compared to those sports because you have a lot of people that'll go play juniors or something before coming into college. So I think that we will see the transfer portal take over, especially when guys have a better season on a team that's less productive.
Hmm.
They might transition into a bigger school, but I don't think we're gonna see that for another 2 to 3 years yet with hockey. I think football or basketball was 2 years behind football, and hockey
Hmm.
was about 2 to 3 years behind basketball. And we're starting to see that take over in basketball a lot more in the past year or so. So I think we're a little bit away from that with hockey, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it down
Well, and I was curious as I'm assuming does Michigan have one, two collectives? Do you know, or do you know how many they have like functioning?
there. I know right now the big one is Champion Circle. There's been
Hmm.
a few others that have tried to kind of spawn up, but the only official one that I'm aware of is Champion Circle right
I see, I see. And then is that, I mean, how, I don't want to talk about it or anything, but I was just curious how it works with the student athletes and the collective. Are they kind of bringing everyone in, the top players, top earners? Because you hear a lot of, maybe not horror stories, but you hear a lot of stories where it's basically just, here we have X amount of dollars and, Dylan's a good player here, Mike's here, let's go get these guys. And you kind of poach, right, just for the money. But I was curious on the student athlete side if there's communication, or maybe you have talked to other buddies that played other schools, if what the communication's like from the collective to the student athlete and so on.
Yeah, collectives are overall, I'd say, very focused on football. I
Mhm.
know from Michigan's standpoint, they just started focusing on basketball, which I think when your team is last in the Big Ten in the regular season, it kind of gets some people talking like, hey, maybe we
Fire
should
some
focus
people
a
up.
little. Yeah, exactly. Maybe focus a little bit more on that. So I think same thing with collectives. We're going to see like we're seeing with the rest of the industry where they're going to start off with the football, the big names, and also the bigger named influencers that they have. I know Michigan has some track stars that are taking right now as well. They're kind of helping out. And then you're going to see it transition into basketball and then potentially hockey. But I'm surprised that they haven't really gone in that space. And that's why Nielsen has kind of carved out that niche right now to help hockey get the representation that they really should be getting.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it a lot. And then as far as, kind of the NIL representation of things, and then when they go beyond into the pros, obviously, the NHL exists, but maybe for the hockey, novices or people who aren't familiar, are there other leagues? I'm sure there's kind of minor league systems and things like that, but do you guys plan on representing them on marketing deals as they, go into professional sports?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that's really cool with the hockey world, especially with the way that Nielsen has signed some players that have already been drafted to the NHL.
Oh,
Like
wow.
Sam Renzel was a first round pick, and we have him on the as well. So really what we're looking to do is to get these brands involved with these athletes now with their price tags a little bit lower.
Right.
And then hopefully nurture that relationship down the line. So yeah, definitely, I think it's a really cool opportunity, and I think too with these athletes now, you're kind of getting two markets for one if they're already drafted, because you're obviously getting their college market, but also this the second someone gets drafted, they're going to start getting some attention from the fans of like that bigger market team. So I think you kind of get like two markets with one with so many hockey players, which is really cool.
Yeah, I like it. And as they go on to professional leagues and like and whatnot, do you have, I mean, after there's like podcasts, there's merch, there's different avenues players can go down. Have you seen one as of late that's kind of popped off, whether it's, memorabilia, merch, things, something along those lines?
Yeah, I think as far as memorabilia goes, I actually remember being at the Rose Bowl and seeing Milrow have his own like merchandise line. And I think there's also some other like great merchandise that's being done. I know like the NIL store has
Hmm.
some great stuff through Campus Inc. that they're doing with some universities where they can get their own line for every individual player. I don't think we've seen like an NIL Jordan yet have that logo. I wouldn't be surprised if one pops out at some point, but I definitely think that's a good avenue to go down, especially like you have fans that are going to buy gear for their favorite team. In the NFL, you see people with jerseys all the time. Why not have your own jersey? That kind of a thing. So I definitely think merchandise is a great line for athletes to get involved. And also it kind of sells itself if your performance is really well. So
Yeah.
it's also an incentive to kind of help your performance out.
Right. And then as we stated that the NIL industry is in its infancy, right? It's only a few years old, but there's been a lot of, I guess, maybe concern or drawbacks with donor fatigue, and as we mentioned earlier, kind of the ROI on certain things. But as we, continue down this new sector, do you think kind of donor fatigue is going to still lead the charge, and obviously donors putting money into collectives or agencies and things like that, or do you think there's another maybe potential pitfall or problem that we haven't hit yet that you think we could hit?
I think that the big thing right now with that is making sure that the donors, when they're partnering with athletes, are partnering with athletes that follow the brand's identity as a whole. Like if you're just having someone signing them to a big check to have them market your item and it's not something that necessarily fits that athlete's brand, then it just looks like it's forced, it's for the money. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of like the donor fatigue coming in. I think that if you look at universities as a whole, there are so many wealthy donors to some of these universities that the money is almost, I mean, you look at Oregon with Nike saying you have unlimited NIL
Yeah.
resources. So it really comes down to finding out those kind of resources that are on those individual campuses, and it changes based from school to school. Some schools aren't going to have that luxury; others will. Arkansas is another prime example with that.
Yeah.
With Tyson being able to pull Calipari from Kentucky is huge. But I think one of the biggest issues that I can see besides that is content fatigue from athletes.
Mm,
The amount of content they need to produce at a time, and especially with being a student athlete, that schedule is grueling. So some of these deals that athletes are signing are expecting them to be there for 6, 7 hours, which just isn't plausible for a day whatsoever when you're only getting one off day. You're spending your whole time doing this for a deal. So one thing that we're really trying to focus on at Nielsen is making sure that these companies know, all right, you have 30, 40 minutes to do what you need to do, make sure everything's done, do all that stuff for the athletes. So they can show up, get the content and leave. So it's not necessarily involved in their schedule. You're spending your entire off day working on one thing. Your performance could decrease. And at that point, you're not going to be getting the same level of deals. So I think that's one thing that we're going to see being a rise of the problem in the industry moving forward.
yeah, no, that's well put. And as kind of Nelson's worked with different brands and companies, maybe what's your favorite project or deal that's kind of you've worked on or you've seen get done over there?
Yeah, with Nielsen right now, we actually are working on getting our first deal through. We have one deal that kind of came on before our CEO hired everyone with a suit company, which has been cool to see. But
Uh-huh.
right now, we're in that negotiation talk with people, trying to educate behind why sponsoring with college athletes is a good idea. So that's probably the biggest goal right now, just get that first deal through. That way, we can get some case studies going and show these other brands what they're missing out on.
Yep. And out of curiosity is, we've seen, I'm sure it's similar with other sports, but is hockey the demographic? Are there certain brands that, you are really trying to touch on that, obviously it's going to make sense for both the athlete and the brand, but are there certain in the sector that, yeah, might work better in hockey than in football or men's basketball?
Yeah, a big thing that we've done with this is talking with our athletes to figure out where their interests align. So every athlete has given us a couple of brands or industries that they'd be interested in. And one thing that we've really found out is a lot of the hockey players are interested in getting involved with golf brands. So
Hmm.
trying to figure out some golf courses, golf companies, they golf on their free time, so it naturally kind of fits. And another thing is some outdoors brands, and pickleball has been a big one that has been requested as well. So trying to connect athletes with their interests, that way it seems more authentic and like it's not just for the money, if that makes sense.
Right. And it's I've talked, about this before on the podcast, so but the listeners and viewers already have already heard this, but I like the two-way street concept, right? If a brand needs to know, okay, Dylan actually likes the product. He's not just, you know, putting this product up just for the money, but he enjoys it, and that's going to build better brand loyalty for both the company and the athlete in the future. But so that's good to hear that. I will say I could not foresee a bunch of hockey players playing golf. I don't know why. It's just I feel like it's too hockey is so much, and then golf is just so much relaxing. But maybe that's the point, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like it's just the way like the puck comes off the ice is very similar to the way that you hit a golf ball. And I feel like
Uh,
the swing is naturally like the same.
uh,
I don't know. It's been pretty fascinating to work with that. And I know you'll call a golf brand and like, well, where are your golf like what are the golf athletes? Like, oh, we have hockey players actually. So that's been a fun conversation.
yeah, for sure. And then as those conversations continue and you guys continue to build the brand or the athlete, client list, are there other certain goals the company has in the hockey world, or is it more just kind of trying to find that next project?
I think like right now it's so focused on getting that first sale. And I think after that, it's just building that relationship with the athletes and showing like, hey, we're a good company. We're here to help you out. We're not trying to get anything messy. We're not just trying to use you for money. Like we're actually trying to find value for the athlete as a whole and being able to nurture those relationships so that they're longer than just through their college athletic lifespan, but also in the professional sense as well.
Yeah, perfect. And then before we wrap up, I do want to touch on kind of the sports management side of things. What maybe advice or thoughts do you have for aspiring sports management professionals in the space?
Yeah, I think really it's just having conversations with people that are doing what you want to do. And LinkedIn will be your best friend when it comes to this. When I was a freshman and sophomore, I know I was sending a lot of cold call LinkedIn's out and expecting not to really hear back from people. And was able to set up multiple meetings a week with people. I didn't even know the questions to ask at the time, but just to be able to figure out what they're doing with their day to day life. Is that something I want to do? And then also tell people what your end goal is, because at that point, 2, 3 years down the line, there might be a job opening that they might think of you right off the bat. And also, people in the industry are a lot friendlier than I guess people think anyone's going to be in an industry that's so competitive.
Mhm.
People are always willing to give you 15, 30 minutes of their time, which was really beneficial for me when I was getting started.
Yep, no, I think that's great. Well put in. It's also, figuring out what you want to do, but then also maybe what you don't want to do is just as important, especially when you're, in your undergrad days or what have you, kind of trying to figure things out. Are there certain ways you stay up upon industry trends, Twitter, or I guess X, still not used to that. Yeah, it's, front office sports. There's certain places you go to, get information.
Yeah, front office sports is amazing. That's one that I'll use all the time. X is also a great way to find things, but also it comes down to the individuals that are on my LinkedIn network. I try to make it, I'm very NIL oriented, so try to connect with people who are within that NIL space and see what they're talking about, what they're posting. And if there's something really interesting that I want to pick someone's brain about, having that conversation with them. So I think again, LinkedIn is such a good tool for that.
Yeah, it is a great outreach tool, especially. I feel like the impressions and the viewers that the audience you can reach is so much bigger than, the other platforms. So especially if you're looking for a job or you're following some bright minds, you can reach so many more people opposed to, the other platforms. So that's always a plus as any of those listeners and viewers are, you know, getting out there in the world and trying to find, maybe a sports management program or a job. I would definitely recommend LinkedIn is the place. So thanks for joining us today, Dylan. It's been a pleasure hearing about your journey, insights, and kind of where have you been along the NIL and also the sports industry. Where can the listeners follow your work along with Nielsen and kind of keep up with the endeavors that you guys are on?
Yeah, I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but LinkedIn is usually my
Mhm.
my source for all my professional material. So feel free to send me an invite. I connect with almost everybody that sends something to me, and I'd love to have a conversation with anybody looking to get in the industry or anybody looking to just network in general.
Perfect. Well, you heard it here first. That's where to find Dylan. And thanks again, Dylan, for joining us today. And listener viewers, this has been another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast. So thank you for tuning in. You can find this on anywhere you find your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. And any parting words before we go, Dylan?
Just enjoy what you're doing, figure out what your niche is in the industry, and have those conversations early. So when you're looking for a job later on in life, it's a lot easier than having no basic.
Perfect. Wise words. Great way to wrap up the podcast. So thanks again, Dylan, for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yep, anytime.